Hello, friends and fellow gamers, I am That Zero, and today I am resurrecting one of my most requested video series on my channel, Surviving Arena. Arena content's pretty scarce out there. There's not really much that you can get for one reason or another. I think the evolving meta that's constantly shifting, that's probably one of the key reasons things only stay relevant for so long, but I do think that there's key points that you can hit on that are relatively eternal that can stand the test of time for the most part. The first of these topics that I'm going to do is going to be how to build and utilize a DPS mage. Traditionally, people haven't really used mages for DPS until somewhat recently, I'd say, and the reason for that is because magic is heavily nerfed in Arena. I think it's reduced by roughly 90%, so it's very, very hard to do good solid damage. So there's only a handful of mages that do it really well, and a few second string mages that can be used for this purpose, but they take a whole lot more effort. Today we're going to go through how you can identify a good mage for Arena, how you could build them, what are good gear, arc and skill choices, good team comps to help complement them, how to pick your fights appropriately for going against teams that actually make sense with that sort of a team, and we'll just kind of go through the mindset of why you would use a mage. The core reason that you'd want to incorporate a magic DPS on your team is if the meta ever gets to a point where there's a lot of stall teams. People running 1, 2, 3 tanks, SM Theria, maybe Theria and Sarah, whatever other supports and tanks come out there that can reduce the damage that they take and heal it off in really big ways and be super annoying all the while doing it. The thing that they have going for them is defense and physical damage reduction, but there's not a lot of ways to get around magic. So if you can boost your damage, even though you're only doing 10% damage, if you can boost it enough to be able to be lethal, it chews right through those defensive comps. So let's get into it. Now, at the start of any of these role videos, I'll call it, whether it's Surviving Arena or PvE, I want to preface my general mind state that I like to give to people when you're theory crafting. For me personally, I recommend in PvE to come up with 1 to 3 core goals that you want for your build. If you have 0 goals, then it's going to be all over the place with 0 direction, and there's going to be so much inefficiency, it's not even funny. If you have more than, say, 3 goals, then you're going to end up spreading yourself so thin that you're just kind of generically okay at stuff, and you probably fail to serve some of the most important roles that you probably are going for. I found going for 1 to 3 to really be ideal. Most of my builds for PvE that I share with people tend to have 2 to 3 goals, and the amount of goals you have can also change depending on how good the unit is for one of those roles. So if a unit's really, really stacked up in, say, the damage department, they might only need 25% or less of their total SC cost in order to finish that amount of damage and be able to get them to a sufficient point, which means maybe you have a secondary role of MP sustain, being tanky, supporting your teammates, or having the utility of debuffing enemies. That's the things that I like to think about. Now, when it comes to Arena, I prefer to have 1 to 1.5 goals, because in Arena, it's much harder to do damage. Things are way more intense in Arena. If you try to just sort of go into a sub-role, it often will result in it just feeling like it's not even there. If you want to be able to tank physical attacks, you need to go hard to tank them, because you could spend 50% of your SC on tanking stuff and still get instantly nuked. So unless you go all out and have that be your focus, it could be really hard to do. And again, with a mage, for example, where your damage is being nerfed by about 90%, if you want to deal some big PP damage and shred through people, you're going to need to stack up damage multipliers for that to happen. And that means that you're going to have less stuff for survival. So you need to pick and choose your battles. If you can't take hits to the face, you need to find other ways to be able to mitigate that stuff. And that's not just for mages, but literally any role. If you want to be slapping hard, you're probably not going to be able to tank as much unless you're a unit that's already so good at doing damage or so good at tanking that you can then spend most of your SC towards a secondary role. Then that gives you the freedom to do so. With that in mind, let's start with what problems do we have to solve when it comes to building a DPS mage. First problem we already talked about. Magic is heavily nerfed. So you have to be able to stack enough damage to be able to work around that, and ideally have a mage that is just so good in their base kit that it's relatively easy to get over that hump, because probably 95% of mages are not built for arena at all. They cannot do good enough damage. We don't have that many good mages in the game. Number 2, mages are super squishy, especially against physical DPS, which you may have noticed is a massive part of the meta, at least here in 2022. Spell Render has been around for a year and a half now, and it isn't going away. Lets the entire team get 50% of their max stocks SCT on top of whatever other recharging things that they have going for them, which means they get to spam a ton of skills. And with power creep actually being a thing, they do more damage than ever. And as I was saying with my build philosophy, if we're trying to pump out enough damage, we're not going to be able to make ourselves bulky enough also to be able to just face tank damage with a mage. Problem number 2, you have to fight for cast space if you opt to use non-stacking magic, so that's a consideration that we need. For anybody that doesn't know what non-stacking versus stacking magic is, stacking magic means it doesn't matter what magic is currently happening, it doesn't matter what's happening on the field at all. You can always cast that spell and it will animate on top of anything else. Things like Lightning Gauge, or Tornado Storm, or Meteor Rain, those are all stackable spells. Examples of non-stacking would be things like Galaxy, or Blizzard. Those non-stacking spells, only one can exist at a time, which means you need to be the first to cast, and then if you do that and the opponent has a mage, they'll be locked out of doing it until your spell completely finishes. The part that you have to contend with is that defense gets a priority on magic, so if you both get MP enough to use your spell at the exact same time and have the exact same cast speed, so you would cast at the same time, it always goes to defense, which means on offense, you are at a disadvantage. So you need to either find a way to incapacitate their mage, have them not have enough MP to be able to cast, you need to cast faster than them, or just simply not use non-stacking magic so that you can always have the freedom to use your spells, at which case that you then need to have a way to get around the fact that they will be using magic that is going to be annoying and potentially flinching you. The 4th problem, MP starts at 5 in Arena, which means you need to be able to get enough in order to start casting your spells. You can't be like a physical DPS that at second 0 you can dash in and start laying out damage. You need to be more tactical with what you do. Now, even though we only start with 5 MP, there is a special arena mechanic to get MP back that helps you to be able to get that up more. Every 6 seconds, I believe you get 1.5 plus 1 MP, kind of like Auto Advanced Magic Circle, which gives you 2, and that stacks with Auto Advanced Magic Circles, which is why something like that would be really, really valuable to have on your mage. And the Arena MP actually is returned to you even if you're dead at every one of those second intervals. So your entire team gets it based on your max MP. So that's a good thing to know. Now, how do you identify and select a good mage for doing damage in Arena? One of the first things that you want to look for is, if you're in PvE, how easily is that unit able to cap? Bonus points if they don't even need magic aura to cap. A couple examples of this is Eliza. Eliza, in my opinion, has the highest scaling magic in the game. The result is that you need to add very little to her to get her to cap on fire, so in PvE, for example, you can build her really tanky, or with a lot of utility, or whatever you want. You can do lots of things with her because her scaling is so high, and that translates really well over to Arena. Another unit that's really good, and something else to look for, is if you have geysers that go highly against the meta in Arena. For a long time, soldiers are some of the most common damage dealers. We've got healers as sorcerers, we've got knights that are usually going to be your tanks, which means really common enemy type to go against is humans. So Human Slayer on physical DPS is really powerful. As you'd expect, Human Geyser would also be extremely effective in helping you to do that damage more easily. Currently, we only have one Human Geyser unit in the game, and that is Maja. Because he has it very specifically, that is something that you can leverage to be able to help do that damage, and so he's somebody that would stand out as, oh, he might be good to try in Arena. Also, units that might just jack up their int through the roof to really, really crazy amounts is also somebody that could be good at doing high magic damage. A good example of that might be someone like Sheeta. So if we take a look here, battle start, if int is greater than strength at battle start, he gets an extra plus 30% int. Now, in some of his passives, he has Imaginary Weapon, which also buffs all of his weapon int before going into all your damage calculations. So if you have a really, really high int staff, it will get magnified even further to be able to get promoted into that. Unlike physical DPS, where there's quite a bit of diminishing returns and it gets really inefficient just stacking strength, at least just basic strength ups, magic doesn't have a ton of damage boosts, and it doesn't seem to have much for diminishing returns at all. The more that you can build up the int stat, the more potent your magic's going to be. Another feature that we'd be looking for is something that just helps immensely for quality of life, and modern mages almost all come with this. And that is the inclusion of auto recast and auto magic circles. Auto advanced circle, this is going to give us 2% of our max MP every 6 seconds. Okay, we kind of talked about that already. That's how this works. Auto recast is going to be a buff that grants 30% cast speed. It's going to be extremely important for an aggressive mage to be instantly casting all of their magic. You need to be able to beat somebody to cast space, or if you only have a moment where you're getting unflinched and you have a split second to cast, you need to make sure that your mage is able to get their spell off. So you need to be able to figure out how much cast speed do you actually require to instacast, and then build enough to do that. Auto recast is kind of a standout. These being auto instead of fast is really important because if you die and get resurrected, you'll still have those buffs. Whereas someone like Sheeta actually has the problem that he only has fast recast. So if he gets revived, he can't instacast his really big important magic, which happens to be Black Hole. Another one that's really common that you'll see is high level magic chant. So between this and auto recast, you're looking at 50% cast speed, which is just fantastic. Extra bonus points to know if you're going to be even more viable in Arena is right here. Attack magic casting speed plus 20%. Anything on top of these standard ways of buffing things is really, really good. So this means now she has a 70% cast speed, which for most attack magic is going to instantly cast it. Depending on what you're using, you might need 80%, which is the highest that I've seen so far on attack magic. Now, another indication is maybe a mage has some unique spells that hit really hard really fast, rather than doing slow damage over time. So for instance, Nether Tempest is really, really great in PvE, but in PvP, its damage is really small hits spread out over a large amount of time. We want a spell that has really high scaling, so it hits super hard, and it does the damage really quickly. So even if there's a really, really long animation, when the damage actually comes in, it's in short bursts, because we want to not allow there to be much opportunity for healers to be able to get the AI to trigger a God Heal or something. So the faster we can dish out damage, the better we can be. Good examples of that would be on Lennius. Either of his ice spells, they have a small delay, and then there's a burst of ice damage, and they have higher scaling than most other magic. An example on Eliza, she has a special effect on Burning Strike, where in one of her special abilities, her traits, it says, hey, each of these 4 spells, gets a special effect. For Burning Strike, it gets extra hits. This spell actually animates really, really fast. It's got a small AoE, but it can be used to potentially knock someone out very early on, which allows us to snowball into some of our bigger spells. Something like Tornado Storm, this lasts maybe 6 or 7 seconds and just does slow ticks of damage. Very bad DPS spell. We don't want that. This was from an old collab. I'm currently running Black Powder on my Eliza, and this is because it's got a relatively large AoE, and the damage happens in a matter of, say, 1 second. So good area of effect, and the damage happens so quickly, usually people can't heal out of it very well. Those are the types of things you want to look for. Of course, I could use something like Big Bang. I'm personally choosing right now to not fight for cast space, at least with her. You can choose to do it a different way. I've done it before, and you can pretty much instantly wipe entire teams if you can make that strategy work. Something else that you'd want to look for: free survival stuff. We'll just stick with Eliza for now. Things like chances to evade can be really helpful. Also, things that will make it less likely for enemies to attack you. So Eliza, for instance, has Sunflame, less likely to be targeted by enemies. There's other effects you can do for this, such as Beast Repellent and Girls Party from the Valentine's Day arc, and you can also give gear and use arcs that have similar type effects. You don't want them to be getting attacked because we're going to be building them as glass cannons. So, Anytime you have free stuff like this, it's really convenient to have. Also, free revives. If you have something like Decoy in your kit, that can be really, really helpful. So if you can get things like that for free, just extra ticks on value. Another thing as well, if you are nil to silence, most modern mages are either resistant or nil. Hopefully you're at least resistant. This isn't as big of a deal. You can solve it pretty easily with some gear or SC, but just something to note when you're trying to identify different features of your mage. Examples of what I would consider the best mages. Obviously, I'm a big fan of Eliza. She's probably the easiest to be able to dish out high damage with. The second is basically on her level, but a little bit more limited since he almost exclusively needs to use non-stacking magic, is Maja. And again, that's mainly Human Geyser. And then you can choose, depending on how quickly you can get your MP and how long you can have him survive, whether or not you want to use something like his ultimate casting. Ultimate casting, it basically makes your spells be much more expensive, but also do much more damage. You also have to cast slower, which means it's harder to take cast space. You have to really, really work a lot harder to be able to actually get these spells off. If you are queued up to cast a spell because someone else's magic is stacked up, you have built up that cast speed. So as soon as the cast space becomes open, you will be able to get it. You don't still have to wait that extra time in between as long as you have already waited. This is something that you'll have to weigh, is can you pull off that cost and can you survive long enough to cast that long? Otherwise, take it off. It is a really good way to buff your damage. Shift Lagrabos is another unit that has it. You'll just, again, need to balance the cost to benefit on that. Speaking of Shift Lagrabos, he's another one that is really, really potent. He's got lots of multipliers and free cast speed, and he also comes with a really potent spell called Black Hole. There's very few units that have it, and even less that actually use it effectively as a really powerful mage. It's just him and Sheeta, and he generally has even higher magic damage than Sheeta. He, of course, comes with all the standard bells and whistles we were talking about between cast speed, auto-advanced circles, all that fun stuff. So, Lagrabos, good pick as well. If anybody was around for the rerun of Secret of Mana, Angela is super easy to hit damage caps with. That makes her a pretty decent candidate to be able to hit really, really hard. And she also uses non-stacking magic, which means you can use that regardless of what enemies are throwing back in your face. And I've heard some really good results from Angela in general, but I would consider her a tier below Eliza and Maja. In a similar vein, but I feel is a little bit better, is Sheeta. Sheeta's really, really good for the reasons that I mentioned before. His main downfall, though, is that he does only have that fast recast. So I'd recommend running something like Cultist Pendant, and if you can spare the Crimson Ore, his accessory is extremely potent on him. This is plus 15% of your max MP with 50 on its actual stat. That is incredibly good. And then you get that extra 20% cast speed. So if he happens to die, you could run this and Cultist for a plus 50%, and then you will, on revive, be able to be up at about 70% cast speed, which should be enough for most of your spells. Or something like Black Hole, you might only have to wait for about 0.5 seconds to cast it, which is generally good enough for most cases. If you build him for damage, he can hit really hard. And Black Hole in general, between him or Shift Lagrabos, it groups enemies up, which makes it much easier to control the battlefield. So even if you don't kill things, your physical DPS will have an easier time, or your support characters will have an easier time because they can hit multiple things at once with their cleave damage. And then the final one that I want to call out is Lennius. In general, I would rank him, for the most part, down by Sheeta and Angela, maybe slightly better. He has an interesting trait where he does double hits, and this works for and against him. If you have on-hit effects, it's extremely good. But the negative is it actually nerfs his damage by about 40%, which means it's much harder to hit that bursty damage I was talking about. He does really good damage over time, but it's a little bit slower and harder to get high damage on, so he needs some help. The reason that he does work really well, however, is that he has some unique magic that nobody else has. For me, I found that Omega Spark is pretty much the go-to. Exrati is not bad because it covers the field, but Omega Spark is non-stacking. It hits multiple lightning bolts that each strike very quickly and have a reasonably high modifier on it, and cover a pretty large area overall. More importantly, at least two of the main tanks that are in the meta right now is Shift Gorm and Murn, and they are both very weak to Thunder. And he happens to have things like weak point magic boost. So he gets extra bonuses on top of the damage multiplication you're getting for them being weak. And in addition, we don't have Night Geyser in the game yet. He happens to have innately Sorcerer Mastery, so he gets Night Geyser for free, along with special boost that he has for free. So that's great. Now, if I missed anyone that you think is a really, really solid mage for DPS, feel free to let me know down in the comments. But I think that generally covers everyone that I'd feel comfortable saying is quite good. As I said, there's others that you can make work, but you have to work much harder with much more damage mods and a comp to support them much harder than these. I think now is a good time for us to get into how are we going to be able to boost damage to be able to help output all of this damage that we're trying to do. 3 core sources. We have Arks, weapons, skills. Let's start with weapons. I said that the int stat is really important. Boosts are really important as well. We can see here, this Archon Wand, massive amount of int. That's going to play into our base stats, which is going to multiply magic by quite a lot. I have Godforged it up. It's got plus 35% magic damage. Absolutely huge. Fantasia Cape. This should be the second thing that you craft on almost every account. First Pureblade Muramasa, then Fantasia Cape, because this is just the best in slot for any attack mage almost universally. It's pretty rare that you have a robe that's going to be better for your particular unit. It's just awesome. It's got a fair amount of MP as well, a really good amount of int, and then just a flat 25% magic damage. Other staff options that we could have. I generally search by int, and you can check gold mine, of course, in order to find some more resources. If you're using someone like Eliza, or anyone else planning to use fire magic, Godfire Staff. Just a fat amount of fire. It's got a really good amount of MP, and 400 int. Really, really nice. If you happen to have somebody using ice magic, similar thing here. Massive amount of int, plus 30% ice damage, and makes it slightly easier to be able to cast that ice magic, which is convenient. For most of you, this will be one of the most accessible. This is actually an AER. This is on the Lugmekia arc. So magic critical damage plus 30%. Ideally, since you want to be doing burst damage, hopefully you also have free critical things in your kit. That's something that I forgot to mention when looking for a good attack mage. If you have free stuff to make your magic crit more often, that could be a valuable asset as well. And this will help you do that while also having good MP and int. So this is a pretty decent option for most accounts. A good one for earth magic that we have. Plus 30% here, again with 50% MP, so if you have a really good Earth Mage, this is something you could use. This is also an AER on one of the more recent arcs. If you're trying to go for light damage, here's a plus 30% to light. Again, good MP stat here as well, so this is something that you might use on Magia. After that, we start getting into a little bit of some lower end stuff. We've got plus 15% magic damage here on the Magic Instructor's Wand, Staff of Quiddity, for a flat plus 20%, you could use that on any mage, it's just not as focused, therefore not as good. Now, if you don't have Fantasia Cape, I'd recommend at least searching for something with high MP. That's generally what's going to be best for you to look for. Ice Phantasm, this has a prior version, I believe it's called like Mirage Robes, something like that. It's on the Galliano Falls SSR arc, the highest MP on a robe that's not on any unique. Very, very good if you just want to boost up that MP and a respectable amount of int as well. Something else that I'd like to run on some of my units is the Mummy Suit, which you actually get out of a shop, I believe, in the campaign. This actually raises your HP by basically 1,000, which then gets bumped up by any more if you happen to need that sort of thing, while also giving you some extra MP, and it also gives you 1 free revive, and all revives in Arena stack. You can revive as many times for however many effects that happen to be on your character. So this could be 1 more, so I like that one as well. If you have a unit that you're trying to make work, and for some reason they don't come with auto-advanced magic circles, you can use Divine Law of Cloudia Rune. This one gives you, essentially, auto-advanced magic circles. Because it gives you that, it doesn't stack if you already have it, so it's completely pointless. Don't bother doing that. Yeah, odds are if you need that effect on your mage, they're probably not a very good mage. Just saying. Accessories. Anytime you can find some bonus damage, along with int and MP, those are pretty good. So Energy Stone Ring is just a generically good one if you happen to be doing fire, ice, earth, or thunder magic attack damage. This can also heal you a bit, which is nice. So in addition to you doing criticals and potentially using Proud Force to be able to heal up, you can also get some extra healing from something like this. Red Moonstone gives you extra cast speed. Again, it's one of those ways that you can get up to that 70-80% depending on what mage you actually have and you're running with. Cultist Pendant is the other core one, especially for someone like Sheeta since he can use the dark damage boost. this will be able to help you there. The drawback that I do not like about Cultist Pendant is it doesn't give you MP, which can be limited depending on how the MP ultimately stacks up at the end of the process for you. I tend to go with Rad Moon if I don't need that full 30% because I like to get the extra MP. This does give you plus 30% cast speed instead of only 20, so depending on how that math works out and the exact amount you need for the spells that you're casting, this could be more optimal for you. Other types of things that are really valuable, sources of revives. We already said that we're going to be wet paper towels basically because we're going to be glass cannons. That means if we happen to take a stray bullet, we're just going to fall over and die. But we need to be able to bounce back, and every time we respawn, we want to be ready to fight. So instead of putting ourselves on a 5-second timer, we can forego letting the opponent get any points on us until after all our revives are gone. Ways that we can get extra revives. Ring of Wisdom. This is from the Great War of Ruin arc. The AER, of course. This gives you a full HP revive, which works super good, and has almost 100 int and 50 MP on it. Top tier. It gives you some other stuff too, like Silence Res. It's just a phenomenal piece of gear. I absolutely love this item. Another one of my favorite items, Black Diamond. This you fuse by taking a bunch of World Boss pendants and meshing them together in the Godforge. This will give you a free revive as well, along with some other goodies, like some resistances and some stats, along with some more MP as well. So yeah, just good stuff all around. I absolutely love Black Diamond. A generally good stat stick that I like as well is Elder King Mask. Gives you a fat stack of int, some decent resistances. Unfortunately no MP, so this isn't usually my main go-to. It also prevents you from using skill, so if you're in a weird place where you're about to get enough magic to be able to cast, the AI decided that you should be casting a skill, you could have your unit potentially locked into a skill animation at the wrong time, and so having something like this could just prevent that niche scenario from happening, while also boosting up your stats quite a bit. Something to consider. This one's a bit of a riskier play, but Nightmare Hat is still a pretty decent option. This is almost a little bit of a win more, and it requires you to be in a mindset similar to running ultimate casting. If you're really confident in being able to survive long enough to get larger amounts of MP, and you really just want to hammer on that burst damage more and more and more, this one doesn't give you MP, so it doesn't help you get more MP faster. It actually makes your MP costs even higher. This gives you plus 25% to added cost benefit of giving you another 25% damage. Again, just pushing it further and further towards that spiky damage where you want to hit super hard. This is definitely an option to get your numbers up there if you need it. I personally don't like running it because I really like being quick on the draw. It's definitely helped my damage get up there in some of my builds before I flesh them out in other ways. So it can be potent, especially if your options are super limited, and this I believe you get off the world map as well. Now this one's quite a bit more limited, so most people won't have this, but it's a very valid call out. Band's Music Box. This is on the Band of Dunes arc as an AER, and it says battle start recover 3 to 10 MP. Now that's a pretty useless effect normally. Like, this is a really shitty piece of gear in my opinion, but in Arena where you start with 5 MP, this could give you a lot, and in a lot of cases it will let you get up to, say, 10 to 12 MP pretty consistently, and then on the high end lets you get up to 15, low end down to 8. If you can get your magic cost low enough, that could mean that you can actually cast a spell at second 0, which could set the tone for how you chain into magic and be able to steamroll through the rest of the match. And it also has a little bit of MP on it as well, just so it's not actually hurting your MP pool overall too much. It's giving you a mild benefit, which is nice. If you happen to be lucky enough to have this, and you want to be casting faster, this could be the little edge that you actually need. What I would do and recommend to you is, when you are testing out your builds, go in and spar, load up a match and check at 3 seconds and then at about 5 seconds MP ticks that happen, and see where your MP pools line up and see how close you are to being able to cast one of your spells. That can help you to figure out, okay, if I add a little bit more MP, I'll be able to cast this spell at 5 seconds instead of at 8 seconds, or whatever it might be. If you don't have most of this stuff and this is you just don't have much to work with, it never hurts to just go with high MP, because it just means you're going to get more MP over time, which means you're going to be able to sling more spells. But again, you can go to Goldmine, filter by MP, you can see what things are available, you can see which things you have. Brooch of the 7 Butterflies, everybody has this one. Most of the rest of this doesn't matter much, but 77 MP is no joke. That is absolutely huge, and that will equate to a lot more in-game when you actually have all your MP ups. Just be aware, look for anything with high MP. All this stuff is totally valid to be able to use. Now, let's go over to skills and see what types of things we can sort out. 1, MP. you just want to stack up MP for the most part. If you find that you don't need this much MP in order to be able to hit your key spells, maybe at the 5-second mark, 8-second mark, 3-second mark, whatever it happens to be for you, then, you know, you could pull it back a little bit. But in general, I usually like to run my max MP because it just helps to ensure that I can keep the train rolling. Magic ups, yeah, same thing as well. Magic up 1 is obviously the least efficient, but it only costs 1, so it's easy to slot in. Now, critical stuff, if you come with a lot of critical stuff, it could be advantageous to run these. I'm not in this particular build. I could adjust it, but depending on who you're fighting and who's relevant in the meta, some units reduce the chance of taking critical damage, at which case it ends up being largely wasted. But on the flip side, even if you only have, say, a 10% chance of doing a crit because they're reducing it by a ton, when that 10% does hit, it could still be enough to just instantly slap them down. So I do like running critical stuff in general, and I'm just not in this particular build. Now, we of course have our geysers. You could be aware of various enemy types in the meta, and if you have a geyser available on your account, say Machine Geyser for Murren if you're fighting a lot of Murrens, Night Geyser if that ever enters the game by the time you watch this. Sorcerers tend to have really high mind, which opposes magic, so I really like adding Sorcerer Geyser. And then of course Special Boost, if you happen to have any of these. You don't need them. Some mages you just simply won't be able to put very viable geysers on. So we do what we can. And then Magic Snipe if it's available to you, just because that's some extra damage for a relatively efficient cost. Another notable one is also Stone Geyser. I don't know how prevalent it is in the meta, but it seems like a fair amount of people like to run Stone World on their DPS units because it prevents piercing attacks, but the negative is it turns them into a stone type, and we do have Stone Geyser available. So if they happen to be running Stone World, well, that helps them against physical, but actually would make them weaker and more vulnerable to your mage if you happen to be running this. An option to be aware of. Fast Aura, really important for boosting up that damage, or Auto if you expect to be dying a lot. I personally don't foresee my Lennius dying very often, so I'm just running fast in order to save SC and just be able to have more freed up to do more damage. Fast Metis is just there so that my Proud Force from my little bit of crits will be able to heal me up. I like to also keep them up there just because if I happen to take on maybe some blizzard damage from an enemy, it's not going to kill me, but it'll take me off max. If I'm able to have any of my spell damage basically automatically fill me up to full health, then I'll be getting Moonlight for an extra 20% int again, because again, that just stacks and hits so hard. Elemental Boost. Whatever magic you're using as your primary source of damage, run the regular and high boost of it. It just makes sense. Just put it on there. Now, if you happen to also have things like Attack Raise 2, this would be my last thing you bring in, because there's more efficient ways to boost damage. But if you're limited on your account, Attack Raise really shitty. I mean, 6 SC for 10, that's pretty bad. At least this is 5 SC per 10, which is starting to get a little bit better. We obviously want to be better than that because we can have things like 10 for 3. You get my point. Pose of Honor is really huge. Always run Pose of Honor if you're running a DPS Mage. Because it will recover 5% of your max MP on a kill, and we're already stacking so much MP, when you finally snag your first kill, you're going to spike up like 100 or 200 MP, which means almost certainly for the rest of the match, you're never going to have to wait to recharge MP again. You're just going to keep snowballing and spamming magic, which is fantastic, obviously. Good way to boost damage, Sky High. Now, you'll need to do some testing depending on what spell you're using. Most of them tend to flinch and lift enemies just slightly, and you will see Sky High be able to pop up on the screen. You just have to be able to take them off their feet slightly for that free 20% damage. Really efficient, great boost. Surprise Attack, extremely good and solid for doing damage as well, especially if you're a manual player, because what you can do is actually move your mage manually behind the enemies, and then they can be focused on your other side of the map, and then you're just getting a free 50% damage slap. It's absolutely fantastic. Backstab only works for physical, so don't worry about that. Terrameld and Terrameld 2. Now, these are situational. You need to build a comp to be able to support this. You could run with, say, V, who's really good at applying ailments, crippling your enemies with stuns, or illness, for example, so that they can't heal off any of your damage. If you're already running a unit like that to cripple them, you may as well get an extra 50% damage out of the deal. Beast Repellent, as well as Girls Party, those are ways that you can reduce the attractiveness of your unit on somebody like Lennius, or Sheeta, or Maja, or Lagravos. They're all men, so that doesn't work. But on somebody like Eliza, again, more bonus points for Eliza, she can have even more ways for enemies to want to ignore her, which is great. Now we've got Staff Boost, which is quite good, 4SC for 10% damage, and Staff High Boost, which is less impactful. I want to say that it's 9, I could be wrong, but that's only a 20% boost, but it's still much better than doing something such as an Elemental Attack Raise 2. A solid one if you happen to need it. Robe Boosts are available, but they're not overly efficient. They tend to buff your mind instead of more magic damage, so it's okay, but it's kind of a last thing that I would look at. Now, Magic Aura, this one, again, is something that you need to weigh out and test and see what you're capable of, because it does cost you 50 more MP, but it does boost up that spike damage, so you might take longer to get that initial cast off, and it might take more, it might be harder to be able to chain into more spells because the overall cost is much higher, so you just need to weigh what benefits you're actually going to gain out of it on if you can run that or not, because it simply might not be worth the actual cost. It might be better to just sling more and more spells. An example of that also is if you're using things like Spell Linkage and Elemental Combo. Spell Linkage says whenever you use attack magic, the same attack magic, like the same exact spell, it's going to stack up more. So the 5th time you cast it, you'll be up to 20% damage, which is pretty efficient for the cost overall. Elemental Combo, even better. This is whenever you use a spell of the same type, which means you could potentially use multiple of the same attribute. I'd still recommend usually only using one, but there's multiple options here. Now, Combo Master and Combo Master 2. This really depends on your team comp. Say you want to help enable this, so you have V on your team to apply ailments for Terror Melt, and then you could also give him impacts so that he boosts your hit count when he hits with his auto attacks as well. And then maybe you have other means of doing damage outside of just your mage and V that can just help to keep your combo meter going even if you get interrupted a lot. Or maybe you're always having the cast space and you just never get interrupted, so you can keep that combo high. A really easy way, again, to just boost 50% extra damage. Overall, still quite efficient. Now, one of the rarer ones, but one that I do still like, is actually Soul Hunt. Very, very rare to be able to get a magic damage plus 30% buff. The main ways you can get it is with this buff, where if you are playing in a way where you're pretty reliably going to have one of your allies dying, just boom, 30% magic damage buff. Another really easy way is if you happen to grab Council of 10, the UR arc, that staff, the flag, whatever it's called, happens to have a passive that gives you a plus magic and physical attack, both of those damage buffs on wave start for 40 seconds. That would be something that you could put on a different unit to be able to boost up your mage DPS. And if you happen to have this arc, this could be a really good way to boost your damage as well. 30% for 8SC, pretty good. And every time an ally dies, it'll re-proc that buff. It won't end up wearing out. And it lasts 40 seconds anyway. Odds are you'll win or you'll die before that buff goes away. Let's go ahead and talk about arc choices. Generally, a good way to start when looking at good arcs is to just filter by int. So if we're filtering by int, we have Institute of Magic comes up at the top. This is generically an okay arc to be able to use. Gives you some damage boost. If you're running multiple sorcerers, boost your damage even more. A little bit of physical damage resistance. You stack extra int the more you get kills, so if you're snowballing really well, it helps you to just keep that momentum going. And it's got really solid stats with 90 MP and, you know, over 450 int. Overall, solid arc. It's not super crazy, but it's solid. Lugmegia, again, it's an okay solid arc. It's got some decent stats on it, and most importantly, it's got a plus 50% damage to your first magic activated. So overall, as a whole, this one isn't going to be as impactful, but if you care most in your strategy about getting an initial nuke that really, really hits hard with your first big spell, this could be a way to do it. And maybe this is something where this is your trade-off from running Magic Aura. Maybe you say, hey, I can't quite manage my MP cost with Magic Aura, so to make up for it, I'm going to be able to cast at the 0-second mark, or the 3 or the 5-second mark, and I'm going to beat my opponent to it, and I'm going to make sure that that spell has plus 50% damage to hit extra hard too. That could be something you choose to do. I personally don't like running it in Arena, but some people don't have as many options, and it is a valid one. Star Calamity. I would say one of the core features of this that I like is that it gives you continuous aura, which otherwise would cost you about 7 MP, and that's just a constant int plus 20%, so that helps. And then it also boosts up your damage. The more debuffs that they have, which it's pretty easy to apply debuffs depending who you're using. Again, just a nod back to Eliza. Another feature she has, she can cast her Anima right away, which actually lowers light and fire resistance, which means it's even easier to put enemies into the negative to be able to do bonus damage. So good things all around. And it also counts as a debuff for these purposes where it gives you more damage. And if they have higher HP, it'll actually amp up the damage a little bit more as well, which means if you hit them at high HP and say you crit, you could have a large amount of damage up front to be able to do that burst, to be able to get them down more. So again, not top tier or anything by any means, but it's a good option. Other good ones we have. Now, I would say this is arguably the best and my personal favorite for the most part. One of my two. I have two favorites. Altar of the Forbidden Book is absolutely up there as one of the best in the game. That's because of the very first effect. MP cost minus 50% at the cost of 20% of your max HP every time you cast. And you get a plus 25% magic damage. And it grants you free immovable object. So if you happen to need that, boom, you get all those things for free. Now that minus 50% MP cost can be really, really huge. It can be the thing that allows you to cast spells at second 0, second 3, whatever it is. So experiment with what the cost of your spells are after minus 50%, and then after minus 50% with boosts from things like Nightmare Hat. Try to find that balance of when you can cast things quickly enough for your liking. And then it's also got a good amount of MP and int on it, to boot. It does make your unit extra squishy, because it has basically no HP and any other stats. But hey, we're building glass cannons here, you know? Why not hurt yourself for power? Love it. Now, the other one that's really, really good is Venom Dragon Babbleland. So, most of this stuff doesn't matter, but what really matters is special terrain only magic damage plus 40%, just flat out. This applies to all magic damage, not just cast magic. So people that have somebody like Amelia, which I don't have Amelia, so I forgot. Amelia is absolutely on that high tier of mage. She does really insane ice damage. Like, she hits really, really hard. And on death, she does magic damage that can potentially nuke the field if you build for it. So just be aware. She's definitely a super good option. She's top tier. I'd say, from what I've seen at least, she's up there with Maja and Eliza, just because she has that versatility. And basically, people will die if they don't kill her because her Blizzard's going to murder them, or they kill her and then her on death is going to kill them. So it's damned if you do, damned if you don't. She's very good. Magic damage plus 40%, absolutely fantastic. And yes, Arena does have special terrain effect. I'm guessing because it has the unique MP gains, that counts as a field effect. Just be aware, that's a really, really high amount of bonus damage. If you happen to have some other arcs that generally boost your damage, it's something you can do as well. Now, I'd like to also point out some arcs that you could put on your secondary units in the team comp to be able to support your mage. So we're going to talk about arcs, and then we'll actually get into ideas for the supporting cast, basically. So the other roles in your team that could help to excel your magic DPS. Theo is a really good option if you are on the side of being able to get spells off faster. And the reason for that is that it allows you to reduce their mind by 50%, which means they'll become much more susceptible to magic. This one is really key when you're doing something like Amelia, where she's going to be casting quickly, and if she's not casting quickly, it's because she's dead. And if she's dead in that first 10 seconds, their mind being reduced means that they're going to get hit really fucking hard. Pretty nice, self-explanatory. Another one that I like is Ghost Time. Apply Spirit Riot. This is good in general, not even just for mages, but for your physical DPS as well, just because it cuts the healing in half that they have going on. So if they manage to get a God Heal off to fight against your magic damage, and potentially physical, depending on your comp, they're going to have to work twice as hard to be able to get that. They get Awaken, okay, they only get 5k instead of 9999. Theria Heal, she was going to heal for 5k, she's only going to heal for 2.5. You get it. Spirit Riot. Not too bad. And if you happen to be using dark magic, this could be something you could use on your main mage, or even a support mage potentially, so that you could potentially apply curse to their units as well, which again is another way you could apply Terra Melt, and it could also be a way of just shutting down their DPS if they're not protecting against ailments. Get punished. Another of note is something to go on your tank. I talked about that we could have our mage run things that will reduce the monster attractiveness, and if they come with free sources of that as well, in addition to something like Beast Repellent, that's good value. It can help you to not get attacked, and the way that that works is you want to have some sort of a tank to be able to absorb the blows from their physical DPS units. This is a pretty good one for doing that, to throw on your tank, because it actually adds +2 monster attractiveness to make them even more likely for the AI to attack them. And then if they happen to get below 50% HP, they'll gain defense in mind, which means they'll be able to stay alive easier and guard heal up even more potently. So really solid arc to throw on your tanks if you're struggling for the allure strategies to be able to work. There's probably a couple others that I'm not thinking of, but for the most part, I think those ones are there and reasonably good. What are some supporting roles that could really help you? One of the roles you could have is a CC mage. So I'm using non-stacking magic on Lennius, so I want to use a stacking magic on maybe a secondary unit. Sometimes that might be my tank. Maybe I'll just have my tank use Blizzard. And then that means it's less likely for my opponent to be able to use Blizzard, and then my mage is more likely able to spam spells easier because they'll be flinch less. That's a win. For me, I'm opting to use Shido with Black Hole, so that I can group people with the Black Hole and be able to CC them better. And also have them within range so that every single cast that Lennius uses hopefully is going to be hitting the entire enemy team instead of only one or two of them. So that works out pretty well. And you'll again see Forbidden Book over here on him, just so that it can cut down that cost. Another thing you could do is ailment support. I said that V is someone that's really, really potent for that, because he comes with illness and stun for free. He pierces enemies, and he's got a really good animation for stunning people with his regular attacks. This particular arc, Man-Made Ether, is a good one to just be able to get those research skills more likely to proc. So if you want to use somebody like him, you can do that. If there's units in the future that apply ailments super well, you could use them as well. Ideally, you want to be using somebody ranged, because in Arena, getting into melee range tends to be suicide, for the most part, depending on who you're fighting. Another form of CC as well, other supporting mage with something like Lightning Gauge. It's non-stacking, it groups enemies into the middle as long as they're within the radius, and then you could run the arc Thunderstone Luster. And this says that all of your thunder magic has a chance to stun, so if they're vulnerable to stun, could stun them, and then they won't be able to cast magic to be able to counter back against you. The DPS units might not be able to attack your tank anymore. Things like that. Could be very, very helpful. I don't recommend everybody go this hard on this type of strategy. I was just leaning into all the things. All right, let's talk about formations and different options that we have. Magician is an okay one. It will make your spells hit harder because it will boost your int, and then it gives you an additional tick of 2% max MP every 6 seconds, or whatever the timer happens to be for it. So if you're struggling really hard and you want more MP over time, this could help your mage, and it could also help to do things like support Celestial Mass on your tank, or something like that. I personally don't think it's quite enough effects for me, but it does work reasonably well, and this overall formation of how things are positioned could be really good, because you could have a tank in slot 1 or 2, and then all these other units, other than maybe 4, or 3 respectively, depending on where your tank is, could be relatively safe to the AoE attacks that would be coming in on your unit. And it's very similar to another really, really popular one that you'll see, which is Spell Render. Spell Render spaces these out really nicely as well, so I would again put a tank in slot 1 or 2 so that attacks are up there, and then the main vulnerability might just be the back slot that's on there. Sword Render is another pretty good one. This actually gives you more chances to dodge attacks, so you could be more likely that if you are going to take a stray hit, maybe you won't quite die from it. It'll boost your defense, gives all of your units, if they're not doing anything else and they're just regular attacking, chances to curse, which is cool. It does reduce your status ailments, so it'll make you more vulnerable to units that are trying to apply status ailments, so be aware of that negative. It also gives you a lower chance to take critical hit damage. Mainly, this will help your tank to stay alive more, so if you don't have all the bells and whistles to make them really tanky, maybe it's worth running Sword Render in order to help with that. Spell Render, in addition to the formation that it has, it will give that SET to all your units, which could mean that your tank's AI is going to move up into the fold more frequently, because it's trying to S1 or something and it needs to get into melee range. And it also gives you a chance to evade magic, which really the main benefit there is if the opponent happens to be hitting you with magic, you might dodge some and be able to get some spells off in between while theirs is animating, which overall could just help you. And also for some units such as Lennius, who consumes skill stocks in order to get bonus damage, it could help you to be burstier. So running something like Spell Render could actually help the damage of units like that. Alright, so now we're going to talk about one of the most important aspects of this, which is knowing how to pick your battles. Every team has something that they're weak against in general, something that really, really just screws them over. So in this team's case, it's that I have 3 units that are relatively squishy. I only have 1 tank, so I rely really heavily on that tank. Which means I need, if I'm going against an aggressive team, I need all those units to have a relatively small area of effect, so that the odds of me losing something like Sheeta and Lennius relatively small. If that's not the case, then my plan's not going to be able to work nearly as good. Units like Roy with a really big S3 or Shift Lagrabos that have a board-wide S3, those can be some vulnerabilities that make things extra hard for us. Or if we're fighting against a DPS that we know counters our tank really well, we tend to not survive against as easily. I'll see things like this, where Vayne has some Pierce Through and a little bit of AoE, but not terrible. Mikasa and Lagrange both being Thunder and generally big damage could be really dangerous for me, especially with them running Theopolis that drops my Mern's defense. So they could kill Mern right away and just chain kills. But if they don't instantly kill him, I should be able to stabilize and just run away with the fight. So let's see how this particular fight goes. So we're going to have our Mern move ahead right away. He gets knocked back towards our V, which our V is probably not going to be doing so good. But we do have a black hole coming in to be able to kind of group them and keep them controlled at least a little. But they did manage to take out Mern, which means they're going to start chaining kills on us. Again, we were too vulnerable. Our Mern was too vulnerable to their particular strategies. So they ran away with it. I know it was a risk because I'm not building as tanky as I probably should be, and I got punished for it because I didn't pick a good fight. Here's an example of one that's a little bit hit or miss. It depends on how well built their Lagrabos is. So if they can manage to get 2, maybe even 3 of their S3s off, that could really be painful for me. If it's only 1 and I lose my units initially, I could revive and potentially stabilize. But Vayne's there to be able to help them try to follow up. And he's also really resistant to Thunder, which is my core DPS. So this shouldn't be a very good matchup. We'll see how much we can get punished here, or if we'll be able to stabilize. So we should lose 3 units right out the gate because of Lagrabos. Which we do. Makes sense, they're all squishy and they're all getting hit. And we're vulnerable because we're running Spellrender. Mern, however, is holding out. He moved to their side of the field, and they are not doing any damage to our units. And now we're starting to do damage, which means they're just chain dying, and they're not even standing a chance. I need to take God Heal off V. God damn it, I keep forgetting. There we go. Relatively quick kill overall. Easy peasy. Now you'll notice our max damage isn't going to be very high, but we have a significant amount of hits, which is what actually matters and why this magic can be good. You have to be strong enough to do good enough damage to coincide with the large AoEs and high hit counts. And the fact that you're not relying on SET. So again, not even 2,000 for max damage. And you saw how quickly we were chunking through their HP. It's pretty good. All right, so let's take a look at a team that tends to be quite tanky and a little bit harder to work with. Duke has a pretty good defensive team. He's running 3 tanks, one of which is also a pretty good healer, and then Theria, who's just, you know, the best healer in the game. He tends to be kind of miserable to go against for a lot of physical teams, to the point that I think a lot of people try to skip him entirely. This is basically what we call easy lunch in the realm of running a magic DPS. Let's see a case where we can actually excel because we chose a team that is disadvantaged by our strategy. At this point, we're not worried about death at all. They're not doing any damage whatsoever. We're crippling them. We're going to group them. And we're just going to start nuking their face with Aeneas's spells. So you can see the damage is pretty immense. So for physical damage dealers, you might be used to dealing like 5-10% damage per hit. Like, it's just not going to be doing very much. But in this case, it just chews right through them. So they are prime time easy wins. And usually the players that can manage to pull off a good defensive stall comp like that tend to be a bit better at the game and play more. And so they're usually going to be higher rank, which means they're usually going to be worth more points too. All right, well, that's going to conclude this episode of Surviving Arena, DPS Mage Edition. If there's anything that you feel I could do better as far as this overall format, or if there's topics that you'd like me to cover sooner rather than later, please be sure to leave them down in the comments below. And if you're loving this content and you'd like to see more, be sure to hit that subscribe so that you can go ahead and get notified whenever I release new stuff. I've started to release a lot more content as of late, a big variety of stuff. Be sure to not miss it out. I appreciate you all coming in, stopping by, learning a thing or two, and I wish you the best of luck at Surviving Arena. Until next time, go forth, murder things.